What cars should you avoid as a beginner in Asseto Corsa Competizione in 2024? Well, I am a beginner sim racer myself, and I recently carried out an experiment with all the cars in the game as a means of finding the best and fastest car for me as I start my journey in ACC. And as a byproduct of that, I had some experiences with some cars that I would rather not have again. So in this video, I'm going to lay out those experiences, and stick around to the end because there's actually a group of cars that I need to talk about which I feel need to be avoided at all costs when starting out. Now, before we dive in, I do want to reiterate that I am brand new to ACC just like you. And I've decided to make this video as a means of providing a new player's perspective to the car choice topic. If you're interested in the process I took to get these results and want to hear discussion points on all the cars that I tested, then please, there's a link in the description to this video here where I explain all the process and for you to try it at home yourself. And with that, let's now dive into our cars to avoid list. First car we need to talk about is the Honda NSX GT3 Evo. Now, most of the mid-engine cars in ACC I have been getting along with, but the NSX is the exception. It's a very tricky car to set up. What I found was that on the base aggressive preset, the car was very nervous into and in the middle of a corner. It gave very little confidence. And with limited setup knowledge, I never found a way to get around that. Tricks that worked on some of the other mid-engine cars that got them working really well for me did not work with the NSX. And as a result, you were never very confident in tackling the corners and hustling the car around for a single lap. Also, it meant that consistency was a real problem because quite often you found yourself off track or having a spin in different places on different laps. So confidence building was very tricky in this car. And as a result, it was the slowest car of my test. It's safe to say that it would be tricky for someone to get on top of this car, and there are other cars that have a similar configuration that are much faster to deal with instead. So avoid the Honda when you're starting out. Second car to discuss is the Bentley Continental GT3. Now, all of the front engine cars in ACC have a good deal of understeer, and it means that the car is relatively safe to get into a corner, but you do need to be quite patient. Now, the Bentley has a very similar characteristic, in fact, to the Mercedes AMG GT3, and in my test they produced almost identical lap times. They both also were quite big and sluggish feeling cars. So it was never a case of directing the car into a corner, more of moving it around, although it did produce some good lap times. However, the reason the Bentley is on my avoid car list is that it's actually a right-hand drive car, where every other car I tested was the driver sitting on the left. So if you got really good in the Bentley and then wanted to change cars or needed to change cars for a particular race or championship, you would have all of the points of the car moved, and finding track limits or dealing with cars around you in a race could be a real problem. It only takes a little bit off track or a slight touch to cause an issue during a race. So it would be safe to say that if you actually were good in the Bentley, it might be safer to use the Mercedes and avoid that issue in the future. So while there is nothing inherently wrong with the Bentley, if you're thinking long term in ACC, best avoid this one and choose a similar car instead as your first beginner car. Third up, and the last single car to talk about in this video, is the Audi R8 GT3 Evo. This car is actually a pretty decent car, and it was able to produce some decent lap times. In fact, the characteristics of the car were pretty settled. It got into and out of a corner really well, it was stable under brakes and acceleration, it did a lot of things pretty well. But it produced an okay lap time, and it never got any better. No matter how hard I tried to push the car or change setup or do things to it, it sort of plateaued at a lap time that was plenty away from other cars in my testing. So overall, it was actually a really frustrating car to not really be able to work out why I could not find more speed. And that's why it's on my avoid list. It was clear that the car worked in a way, but not being able to take it to that next level, I feel that as a beginner, where your skill level is quickly increasing, having a car that won't come along with that will be a really frustrating process, particularly when there are similar cars producing much faster lap times around you. So, same as the Bentley, pick a similar car that just makes more lap time and go after that one as your first beginner car. And lastly, the important group of cars that you must avoid as a beginner sim racer at ACC are the older generation GT3 cars in the game. Just like in the real world, progress only moves forward. So the current generation cars are simply faster. And in game we can see that with groups like Low Fuel Motorsport or LFM not putting those older cars on the balance of performance list, as there's not enough they can do with them to bring them up to speed inside the game. So think of cars like the 488 Ferrari versus the 296 Ferrari, its latest version, the different generations of Mercedes AMG, the V12 Aston Martin Vantage versus the newer V8 Aston Martin Vantage. These are all things you need to get your head around and pick the latest version of. It's pretty simple. It will be the latest year of the car that you can see in the menu, and just pick that one as you go through all of your testing. Now, it's obviously a real shame if one of those older cars is your all-time favorite, and hey, if it truly is and it's the only car you want to use, just be aware it will be slower at the box. But as we know, sim racing is all about having fun and having the best enjoyment, and as a simulation, you want to be trying to simulate what you want to be simulating in this virtual world. So although all of these cars on my list are ones that I will be absolutely avoiding, if you really love them, forget everything I'm saying, choose them, go have fun. Just know you're probably going down a harder road than some of the more genuinely faster cars that the game has. So there we have it, my list of cars to avoid when starting out in ACC as worked out from my very own testing. And I just want to finish by saying that I found it truly valuable, the time I've spent doing this testing, and I've learned a lot about all the cars in the game, but also my own driving style, which will be a really important thing moving forward in ACC and LFM community races. Oh, and if you're wondering where the Porsche is on this list, well, you'll need to check out this video here, where I actually make a mention of this car near the top of my list rather than near the bottom. So check that one out if you want to know more about that particular car. And with that, we're all finished here. Thanks very much for watching. I really hope this has been useful for you as a beginner sim racer. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more about the beginning of my ACC journey. Race hard, stay positive. We'll see you all again in another video. Cheers.